Listen to me closely for 10 seconds. The moment you stop reacting is the moment you take your power back, not when you shout, not when you explain, not when you prove your worth, but when you choose emotional distance in a world that feeds on your pain. We live in a culture that profits from your reactions. Your anger becomes entertainment. Your heartbreak becomes content. Your need to be understood becomes a leash. And somewhere along the way, we were taught that feeling everything means being strong. But that's not strength. That's exposure without protection. Emotional detachment is not coldness. It is not apathy. It is not shutting your heart down. It is the quiet, grounded decision to stop bleeding in places where no one is willing to help you heal. Here's the truth most people won't tell you. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every behavior deserves your emotional labor. When you react instantly, you hand over control. When you pause, you reclaim it. And that pause, that's where your dignity lies. Detachment is saying, I see what you're doing, and I refuse to abandon myself to meet you there. It's understanding that your peace is not something to negotiate. It's realizing that you can care deeply without being consumed. This is not about becoming numb. This is about becoming selective. Because when you stop letting chaos set the emotional temperature of your life, you don't just survive, you begin to lead yourself. Most people think emotional detachment means you stopped caring. No, it means you finally started caring about yourself. Let me say this gently but clearly. If someone can control your emotions, they control you, your mood, your confidence, your sense of worth, all in someone else's hands. And that is an exhausting way to live. Emotional detachment begins the moment you stop needing people to validate your reality. When you no longer beg to be understood. When you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect waking up. Here's what detachment actually looks like in real life. You listen without absorbing. You observe without reacting. You walk away without announcing it. You realize that some people don't want connection. They want control. They don't want resolution. They want a reaction. And once you see that, something shifts inside you. You stop chasing closure from people who benefit from your confusion. You stop arguing with someone who feeds on your emotional exhaustion. You stop shrinking yourself just to keep someone comfortable. Detachment is trusting yourself enough to say, I don't need you to agree with me for me to be right. It's knowing that silence can be stronger than defense. That walking away can be braver than staying and fighting. And here's the uncomfortable part. When you detach, some people will accuse you of changing. They're right. You changed because you grew. And growth always threatens the systems that relied on your emotional availability. There comes a moment when you realize you are tired. Not tired of loving, not tired of trying, but tired of losing yourself every time someone pulls you into their storm. That's the moment emotional detachment stops being a concept and it becomes a survival skill. Because constantly absorbing other people's emotions is not empathy. It's self-abandonment. It's carrying weight that was never yours to hold. And over time, that weight doesn't just exhaust you, it reshapes who you are. Detachment teaches you to recognize what is yours and what is not. Their disappointment, not yours. Their anger, not yours. Their inability to communicate, not yours to fix. You can witness pain without becoming it. You can care without collapsing. You can love without bleeding. Here's what changes when you emotionally detach. You stop personalizing everything. Not every tone is an attack. Not every silence is rejection. Not every problem requires your emotional presence. You start asking a powerful question, is this mine to carry? And if the answer is no, you gently put it down. Detachment is maturity. It's emotional intelligence in action. It's understanding that being regulated in a dysregulated world is a radical act. And let me tell you something freeing. You are not responsible for managing other people's feelings about your boundaries. You are responsible for protecting your inner life. When you stop absorbing what was never meant for you, your nervous system finally exhales. And in that exhale, clarity begins. Emotional detachment doesn't happen overnight. It happens the day you choose self-trust over emotional chaos. Because the truth is, many of us were conditioned to believe that being available at all times makes us lovable. That if we don't respond, fix, soothe, or explain, we'll be abandoned. So we stay emotionally plugged into people who drain us and call it loyalty. But loyalty without boundaries is self-betrayal. Detachment begins when you stop confusing guilt with responsibility. Just because someone feels something doesn't mean you caused it. Just because someone is upset doesn't mean you are wrong. And just because you can help doesn't mean you should. Here's the quiet shift that changes everything. You stop reacting from fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. Instead, you respond from alignment. You pause before answering. You breathe before explaining. You choose not to engage when your energy is being tested, not respected. Detachment is not about pushing people away. It's about pulling yourself back into your body, back into your values, back into the part of you that knows when enough is enough. And when you do this, something unsettling happens. People who benefited from your emotional over-functioning will feel uncomfortable. They may call you distant, cold, different. But what they're really noticing is that you are no longer emotionally accessible for manipulation. You are no longer available for chaos. And that's not cruelty, that's clarity. Because emotional detachment is not the absence of love. It's the presence of self-respect. One of the most powerful things emotional detachment gives you is the ability to see people clearly without the fog of hope, fear, or fantasy. Because attachment says, maybe if I love harder, they'll change. Detachment says, I believe you when you show me who you are. And that difference changes everything. When you detach, you stop filling in the gaps with your own goodness. You stop explaining away behavior that hurts you. You stop calling inconsistency confusion and disrespect, misunderstanding. You begin to accept reality as it is, not as you wish it would be. That doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you stop lying to yourself. Emotional detachment allows you to observe patterns instead of defending people, to notice actions instead of clinging to words, to recognize when someone's presence costs you your peace. And here's the hard truth. Not everyone you care about is capable of meeting you where you are. Some people can only meet you at the depth they've met themselves. Detachment helps you stop demanding depth from shallow places. It frees you from waiting for emotional availability from people who have none to give. You no longer chase consistency, you choose it. You no longer argue for clarity, you align with it. And in that alignment, your standards rise quietly. Not because you think you're better than anyone, but because you finally understand what it costs you to stay where you don't belong. Detachment is choosing peace over potential. And that choice, that's where your power begins to solidify. Emotional detachment teaches you how to stay present without being pulled under, how to stand in the room without carrying the room. Because when you are deeply attached to outcomes, every conversation feels like a test. Every interaction feels like a verdict. Every silence feels like danger. Detachment releases you from that constant internal tension. You stop monitoring every shift in energy. You stop scanning faces for approval. You stop adjusting yourself to keep the emotional temperature comfortable for everyone else. Instead, you become anchored. You speak your truth without forcing it to land. You express your needs without chasing a response. You set boundaries without rehearsing guilt. And something powerful happens in that steadiness. Your nervous system begins to trust you. You are no longer living in anticipation of emotional impact. You are no longer bracing for reaction. You are no longer shrinking to avoid conflict. Detachment allows you to say, I will show up honestly, and I will also survive if you don't like it. That's freedom. It doesn't make you passive. It makes you intentional. You choose where to invest. You choose where to engage. You choose where to step back. And in a world that constantly demands your emotional availability, that choice is revolutionary. Because emotional detachment doesn't disconnect you from life. It reconnects you to yourself. You stop being emotionally hijacked. You stop living at the mercy of other people's moods. You become steady in motion, grounded in uncertainty, whole even when things are unresolved. There is a kind of strength that doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't need to be witnessed to be real. That strength is emotional detachment. When you detach, you stop proving, you stop defending your worth in conversations that were never about understanding. You stop overgiving in hopes of being chosen. You realize that the people meant to stay will not require you to abandon yourself to keep them. Detachment shifts how you experience conflict. Instead of spiraling, you get curious. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of collapsing, you stay rooted. You listen not to respond, but to understand what is actually happening. And sometimes what you understand is this person cannot meet you here. That awareness doesn't harden you, it clarifies you. You begin to respect your emotional limits, to leave conversations that drain you, to end cycles without dramatic exits. You stop chasing emotional safety in unsafe spaces. And here's the subtle power of detachment. It creates room for discernment. You notice how your body feels around certain people. You trust that signal instead of overriding it with logic or guilt. You learn that peace is not something you earn by being patient enough. It's something you protect by being honest enough. Detachment teaches you that walking away does not mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally succeeded at choosing yourself. Emotional detachment changes the way you love. Not by making it smaller, but by making it cleaner. You stop loving from fear. Fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. And when fear leaves, authenticity enters. You no longer cling. You no longer chase reassurance. You no longer sacrifice your inner stability to keep a connection alive. You love with open hands instead of a clenched grip. Detachment allows you to say, I want you, but I don't need to lose myself to keep you. That kind of love is grounded. That kind of love is free. You begin to understand that real connection does not require emotional chaos. It does not thrive on unpredictability. It does not demand constant proof of devotion. Healthy love respects nervous systems. It honors boundaries. It grows in safety, not intensity alone. And here's the quiet miracle. When you detach from needing love to complete you, you attract relationships that add to you. You stop mistaking emotional intensity for intimacy. You stop confusing attachment with connection. You stop romanticizing instability. Detachment teaches you to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it, to allow space instead of filling silence with anxiety, to trust that what is meant for you will not require you to beg. You love more deeply because you are no longer afraid of losing yourself. You are rooted. You are whole. And from wholeness, love becomes a choice, not a desperate need. Emotional detachment sharpens your discernment. You stop confusing familiarity with safety. You stop mistaking history for compatibility. You stop staying simply because you've already invested so much. Detachment gives you the courage to ask a dangerous question. Does this cost me more than it gives? And when the answer is yes, you don't argue with yourself anymore. You stop negotiating with red flags. You stop minimizing your needs to keep the peace. You stop calling self-neglect compromise, because clarity changes your tolerance. What once felt normal now feels heavy. What once felt exciting now feels unstable. What once felt acceptable now feels misaligned. Detachment is not dramatic. It's decisive. You don't need closure from everyone. You don't need apologies to move forward. You don't need permission to choose a healthier life. You understand that some chapters don't end. They dissolve once you stop feeding them. And here's the quiet empowerment. When you detach, you reclaim your time, your energy, your emotional bandwidth. You begin to invest where there is mutual respect, where effort is consistent, where your nervous system doesn't have to stay on high alert. Detachment teaches you that peace is not boring, it's stable. And stability is where real joy takes root. This is where it all comes together. Emotional detachment is not a punishment. It is not withdrawal. It is not rejection. It is freedom. Freedom from chaos that disguises itself as love. freedom from people who profit from your emotional labor, freedom from living in a storm that isn't yours to weather. When you detach, you reclaim the most precious thing you've ever had yourself. Your energy becomes sacred. Your peace becomes untouchable. Your choices become deliberate, not reactive. And here's the truth people avoid: the world will try to guilt you. It will accuse you of being cold. It will whisper that detachment is selfish. But let me tell you, choosing yourself is the most courageous act you will ever commit. Because courage is not loud. It doesn't need applause. It simply stands firm, quietly saying, I will not abandon myself to preserve someone else's comfort. Emotional detachment is radical love, first for yourself, then for everyone around you. It allows you to engage from wholeness rather than scarcity, to give from abundance rather than fear, to connect without losing your center. The power of detachment is this: when you no longer bleed for the approval, validation, or control of others, you become unstoppable. Your life becomes a space of clarity. Your relationships become intentional. Your heart becomes a sanctuary, and in that sanctuary, finally, you are free, not just to survive, but to live fully, fiercely, and unshakably.